Joining. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. Welcome to the Solar webinar series. For those of you who do not know, Solar is the Society for Learning Analytics Research. And this webinar is one of Solar's initiatives. Its aim is to make a range of topics concerning learning analytics research more readily available to Solar members and other interested people to stimulate discussion about these topics and to create a set of videos that can serve as resources for the learning analytics community. For the webinar series, we invite learning analytics researchers to share a short presentation about their work and to open the discussion about a topic they are passionate about. And you can find recordings of the previous episodes on our website, where we'll also post the recording of today's talk. So today, your hosts are me, Roger Scalisa from the University of Oslo, and Isabel and Iona. So we'll be helping with all the logistics of the webinar. Great to have you all here, and we are very happy that you joined the webinar, despite that we are getting into holidays. So the webinar will be structured as follows. We have a few communication rules to let you know about. And then I'll explain, I'll later introduce the speaker, and then after that, we shall have time for discussions after the end of the discussion. So first, to let the webinar run smoothly, we kindly request that everyone mutes your mic during the talk so that we don't get any interruptions. And if you have questions for our presenter, feel free to post them in the chat during the talk. We will also collect questions and put them during the Q&A at the end. Also at the end, you may have an opportunity to unmute and ask your question. After the presentation, the host will lead the discussion by selecting written questions in the chat box or by selecting someone who raised their hand. So we have a couple of different options to have our questions either in the chat or by unmuting, and that will be communicated after the presentation. So without wasting any time, I will now introduce our presenter. Today, we are very happy that Dr. Olga Vivak joins us for the webinar. Olga is Associate Professor in Media Technology with a specialization in Technology Enhanced Learning at the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at KTH in Sweden. Olga's research spans a number of topics, including learning analytics in higher education. She's also an active member of the learning analytics community. She was, for example, the main organizer of the Nordic Learning Analytics Summer Institute in the last 2 years, including one that was just held last week. So today, Olga will talk about privacy in learning analytics in her presentation titled Unpacking Privacy in Learning Analytics for Improved Learning at Scale. So I'm very excited for this talk, and Olga, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roger, for a nice presentation, and thank you for everyone for coming here. I will try not to talk too fast, which I usually just let me show my slides. Can you see them?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So thank you very much for having me here. Today I'm going to try to unpack a bit of privacy in learning analytics. So we all know that the use of digital technologies in educational settings has escalated during the past years, and this has led, of course, to increasing data collection and use in these settings. We also know that while data-driven analysis of learning and teaching activities can be used to improve students' conditions for learning, since we cannot improve learning directly, for example, by making more personalized learning paths, there are privacy issues involved. And we also know that those issues are rarely addressed in the actual learning analytics setup so far. So today I'm going to try to unpack a bit what can be done by the learning analytics researchers and practitioners with a focus on how LA scholars define privacy in learning analytics. And also I'm going to present a model that we have developed that focuses on students' privacy concerns in learning analytics. So there are two main aspects that I'm going to cover. Let me just see if I can. Oh, yeah. So why do we need to define privacy in LA? We know that protection of student privacy is critical for scaling up LA, and we know that the upscaling is still not in a way that we can say that we do learning analytics everywhere and learning analytics improve actual learning. It doesn't still so much. We also know that poorly implemented frameworks for privacy protection may negatively impact learning analytics outcomes and also the trust in the discipline. So the learning analytics community can be questioned if we don't really do these things. So far, we also know that the treatment of privacy in the learning analytics setting has at times been thin and also underrepresented. And privacy issues have been rarely addressed in the actual learning analytics setups. We also know that protection of privacy is legally regulated in violation of it has serious legal consequences. So we have really to be careful about what we are doing and how we do it. And to be able to design and implement models and tools for privacy protection, there is need to understand privacy itself and also the settings in which it has to be protected. We also know that privacy concept is not a new concept. It has been defined and studied thoroughly in many disciplines, such as information system, law, economics, and so on, in which researchers often offer a clear definition. However, the LA community is still to develop such clarity and depth of analysis. And currently, it creates a serious constraint to both LA theory and practice, for the reasons that it may impede not only our understanding of what constitutes privacy in LA research, but also what can and should be done in practice to protect student privacy, enable their agency. So without defining it, we have hard times to know how we can approach and what should we do about it. So in this preliminary study or study that we have conducted, it's not published yet, we looked at two questions. We looked at how do the definitions of privacy in learning analytics context relate to the established approach to privacy, and also what, if any, specific learning analytics approaches to define privacy are there. Here I will present some view of privacy. So privacy is not a very easy concept. It's a concept which is in disarray and nobody can articulate exactly what it means often. It's also a multidimensional, elastic, and dynamic concept. So what privacy means in one context, for example, it doesn't mean that it means the same in the other context. And also perception of it may change over time and with the experiences people gain during their lives. In information system research, scholars have conducted a thorough and extensive review of more than 320 articles where they looked at how privacy had been defined by the researchers. And they found out there are two basic approaches. There are value-based approach to privacy and cognate-based approach. So value-based approach views privacy as a human right, which is integral to society's moral value. And according to this approach, privacy can be seen as a right and also as a commodity. So the former one, the right, it emerges from the literature that sees privacy as a right to be left alone. And it has been adopted from a law review by Warren and Brandis, in which privacy has started being viewed as a developing right in US law. Privacy as a commodity is not an absolute value. It's a subject to economic principles and cost-benefit analysis and trade-offs. Other researchers have also looked at defined privacy as a state, which has been, the definition of which has been introduced by Westin, who defined through 4 substates, which are anonymity, solitude, intimacy, and reserve. Further on, researchers also added to this definition to the limited access to information and also the state of limited access to person. So we have different types of state there. And finally, many articles, or majority articles, information system research so far look at privacy as a control, which refers to the ability to determine for themselves when, how, and to what extent information about them is communicated to others, and also to the ability the individual or student to control access others have to his or her personal information. So this is approaches that we took as a ground to look at what the LA community has done so far. We also would like to highlight what is not privacy and why it's important. It's important for many reasons. So scholars have also highlighted the importance of distinguishing between privacy and other related, frequently overlapping concepts, including anonymity, ethics, security, secrecy, and confidentiality. Some LA researchers also have started to do so, but there are very few exceptions on that. So just to make it clear that privacy is not equivalent with ethics. Even though there are ethical dimensions linked to privacy, it's incorrect to equate privacy with ethics. In fact, one can actually easily engage in empirical privacy-related research without ever considering ethical aspect. Just here. Also anonymity, which is also can be confused and sometimes tied together. So it refers to the ability to conceal an individual's identity. Security relates to the concerns about the protection of personal information with the specific goals. And integrity means that the information is not altered during translation and storage. Also, I would like to point out that while the list is not comprehensive, there are many more concepts that overlap and that are often studied in a related way. It gives some indication of the complicated relationship among the concepts, and this makes the field pretty complex to study and to focus on. So we conducted a scoping review looking which is of particular use when topic has not been extensively reviewed, and also it has many different purposes, including those that clarify the key concept or definitions in the field. So we looked at the number of databases, we looked at there was empirical, theoretical research, and also technical research studies with a focus on privacy. We looked at the conference paper, journal article, even book chapters, and also looked at peer review in English articles published in English, and also we excluded articles that are review and editorial papers. So we ended up with 59 articles at the end, which have been produced by the LA community. So what we have found out is that we still have a number of conceptual papers. We have actually 53% of conceptual articles still, and many of these conceptual papers and frameworks presented are not validated in empirical settings. We also see a little bit raise of empirical studies during the last 3 years, and also we have some technical papers that have been produced by the LA scholars. We also found that, maybe surprising, maybe not, but the majority, 74% of the paper that was looked at did not study or did not define the privacy in the static LA without, with specific. We found that in line with the earlier research in information system research, LA scholars have defined privacy 30% as a control, privacy as a state, and also privacy as a right by 6% in other definitions. So I'm going to exemplify some of these. I'm not going to explain each study in detail, but I'll give you some examples. So the definition of privacy as a right was presented in the 6% of the papers. And he's in her contemporary view of privacy theories provided earlier comprehensive conceptualization of privacy that can be considered in LA. And in that study, she pointed out that privacy referred to the rights of an individual to be left alone and free from intrusion and interference. The understanding of privacy as a right has been also offered by Drashley Greller in 2016, their delicate checklist. Also, Corinne and colleagues in the exploration of critical ethical issues regarding the use of LA have also referred to privacy as a right to freedom from surveillance and unauthorized disclosure of one's personal information, and also as a legal principle, a basic human right. And finally, Tura Hale also and a colleague of his explored the concept of information privacy in a cross-cultural setting to define a common point of reference for privacy engineering or privacy by design in the LA setting, and indicating the Western tradition compared to the Asian or Chinese tradition, there is a privacy seen as a right of individual to be left alone. The majority of the found, which are not many papers, I would highlight it again, it's only 30% of the old article we found, defined privacy as a control. So privacy control were defined by Darkif Thaler and Clara Schumacher, where they refer to privacy as a legal definition, a person's right to control access to his or her personal information. Others also argue that privacy involves self-determination and that individuals are able to determine their level of privacy or disclosure of personal information. And also privacy has been defined by Rebecca Ferguson in her, is one of the ethical challenges as a freedom from unauthorized intrusion, the ability of individual or a group to seclude themselves or information about them, and thus to express themselves selectively. I will skip, I think, this. And privacy as a state was also defined by researchers. We didn't find any definition of privacy as commodity in the LA field. So Tsai and colleagues, when examining the student expectations of privacy, define privacy as a state in which individual is free from being disturbed and observed by others. Also, we see that Jones and Velskoy stress that there are some different phases on the concept of privacy, and one of them is limited access to oneself. We also found some other approaches to define privacy in LA that are not in alignment with their general literature on privacy in information system, and they relate to privacy, seeing it as a contextual integrity and also is intellectual privacy. So some of the researchers consider privacy under the umbrella of contextual integrity, and here it's important to notice that contextual integrity is not proposed as a full definition of privacy, but rather than as a framework for evaluating the flow of information between agents with a particular focus or emphasis on explaining why specific patterns of flow provoke public outcry in the name of privacy. So referring to the framework of Nissenbaum, privacy is associated with and regulated by a flow of information based on the context relative norms, which are context, actors, attributes, and also transmission principles affecting the flow of information from information senders to information receivers to information subjects. We also see the mentioning of contextual integrity in Dresch and Greller's work, where they pointed out that another important aspect of privacy, especially in the age of big data, is contextual integrity. Moreover, recently, some of the researchers looked at the privacy from the intellectual privacy point of view, which is grounded in the richer conceptualization of intellectual privacy that stresses that our ideas and values keep pace with our technologies. Intellectual privacy provides the protections necessary to introspectively and socially engage in ideation and provides a zone of protection. Joan and colleagues define intellectual privacy as one that protects oneself one is doing intellectual activities such as searching information, writing, and thinking. Here, important to mention, sometimes researchers actually do not stick to one definition of privacy sometimes, and in several studies, they put different emphasis related to some different definition. Therefore, the total number of the articles we found is a bit percent-wise is a bit higher than 100% altogether. So our scope and review showed that the majority of papers did not define it at all. And this is aligned with Tura Heil's finding in 2020, and Tura checked, I think, examined the papers published in LAC proceedings, and also I think found only one article that defined at the time privacy. Our review shows some improvements in that, but most articles still lack definition. I would like to highlight that it's not enough to come up with students' view through which privacy has frequently been studied by LA researchers. Privacy actually is not to somebody's views. It's one of the most critical success factors for technology use in education, like in many other settings. In fact, it can alone stop any project on procurement. The strong AI legislation today is enforced strongly and has, for example, today stopped further use of software and services for US companies such as Google and Microsoft. As privacy is not straightforward, it's pretty complex, as I said, it's not simple checklist, but concerns data handling in depth in detail, and therefore we need to develop a thorough understanding. For that, it's important to recognize the role of the student engagement determined privacy solutions. So here I would suggest to use participatory design methods originating human-computer interaction research field, and also especially in the Scandinavian tradition that look at privacy and participation as a democratic process. Also considering the evolving nature of privacy and the fact that context may differ considerably across cultures and context, LA scholars should benefit from direct involvement with key stakeholders, not only in the process of design, but also in the process of defining main content. What does it mean? What does privacy mean for a student in a Chinese culture? What does privacy mean for a student in an American culture? So here I would suggest to take or make use of a research method that are used by HR community, which focus on value sensitive and culture aware design methods that have been used and developed for the purposes of design technology. So all in all, the results of this study or this preliminary study show or highlight a clear need to define privacy in LA to be able to develop a responsible approach to student data, one that would enable practicable LA in education. So how can we make it work actually for improved teaching and learning, and also at scale? So what are the implications for practice and policy? So we would recommend to start from already existing understand definitions of privacy established in other fields. So we are not reinventing the wheel. We can actually make use of what we already have, not just in research, but also in practice. In particular, for example, in European context, GDPR, as this is a reality that each institution needs to handle. Also clarify how privacy definitions made within the LA in order to cover some field-specific issue related to those existing definitions. We have started to try to do it in this review, but it's also something to consider also for practitioners. So it's advised to use such specific definitions only when the ones existing are not enough. Also, I think it's important to consider what privacy means for students, for teachers, and also for educational institutions, the main stakeholders of LA. It may mean very different things for all of them. So it's really important to make studies and to thoroughly try to understand what does it mean for each of these stakeholders in order to work with it, in order to protect students' privacy and make LA scalable. And also the definitions of LA must be practicable. This was just a short introduction for the definition of privacy. Now I'm going to unpack another construct that has not been studied thoroughly by the LA research community, which focuses on student privacy concerns in learning analytics. So if you would like to read the whole paper is just recently published in the British Journal of Education and Technology, and we have conducted this together with colleagues from the Stockholm University recently. So why? We're still talking that we need to address privacy, which is critical for LA implementation. Understanding students' privacy concerns is essential first step to developing effective privacy enhancing practices in LA. Actually, there are few research studies that in LA that focus on privacy concerns. I'm not saying that privacy hasn't been studied, but privacy concerns as a concept has not been studied thoroughly. And I will explain you what I mean by it later. We also lack of empirically validated privacy-related frameworks in LA. We have quite many of different kinds, but they sometimes hard to apply in practice and for specific purposes for several reasons. So what is privacy concerns and how are they different from expectations, for example, or other attitudes that people usually study? So the term privacy concerns refers to individual concerns about the possible loss of privacy resulting from information disclosure to a specific external agent or institution. It also differs from individual expectations or general perceptions or awareness of how the institution should handle the information. So what they expect and what they're concerned about may differ quite much. So we decided to develop and validate a model to explore their privacy concerns in the context of LA. In particular, we explored how students' risk control perceptions may influence their privacy concern, their trusting belief, and also their non-disclosure behavior. And we examined if there is a direct link between students' privacy concerns, trusting belief, and non-disclosure behavior. Here I'm going to present a model, which is not mine or ours, but this model has inspired us to propose our model. So the model is antecedents privacy concerns outcomes framework proposed by Smith 10 years ago, also based on the extensive research or review research in their privacy in information system, and it provides a comprehensive view of the link between privacy concerns, its antecedents, and also outcomes. The framework suggests that individual privacy concerns mediate the relation between several antecedents and behavioral outcomes. And recent studies in several fields use this framework to develop as a robust tool to guide and develop privacy-related models. So we are not the first one who are using it, but we are the first one who are using it for in the context of learning analytics. So for this study in particular, we have chosen to focus on two antecedents, which are perceived privacy risk and perceived privacy control. So these two constructs were selected because they are account for concern an individual can develop when determining whether to disclose personal data or not. And risk and control constructs are related to privacy calculus, that is an assessment of individuals make that their personal information will subsequently be used fairly and they will not suffer negative consequences. The central concept here is information privacy concerns, and the two behavioral outcomes that we examined are trusting belief and self-disclosure behavior. So what are these concepts? So individual privacy concern, information privacy concern refer to individual concerns about the possible loss of privacy as a result of information disclosed, for example, to a specific external agent, like say a company that provided a tool to be used in educational settings. Perceived privacy risk refer to individual expectations of losses associated with the disclosure of personal information. Perceived privacy control refers to individual beliefs and his or her ability to manage the release and dissemination of personal information. And then we looked at two outcomes, which are trusting belief, the degree to which organizations are dependent in protecting use of personal information, and self-disclosure behaviors generally involve revealing information about oneself to others. So these are 5 constructs that we investigated. So we proposed a number of hypotheses with 2 independent variables, which are perceived privacy control and also perceived privacy risk, and 2 direct behavioral outcomes, which are trusting belief and undisclosed behavior. So these are hypotheses. I'm not going to go in detail. You can read the whole article, but I will show you some results. So for the validation, we use some adapted instruments. We adapted 20 items from previous research on privacy information system. We have piloted them among the students before we distributed to a larger population. We use the 7-point Likert scale, and we use a sample of 132 students. These are some examples. So if you would like to take part of the instrument, you can take a look at the appendix in the article, and you will find the instrument that can be used to investigate privacy concerns in your institutions and the settings you're interested in. So we distributed in 2021 in 3 universities in Sweden in online way, and we had 132 out of a little bit more than 1,000 students who completed the survey. We have pretty equal distribution between bachelor degree master students in our sample, and also we have a bit more of male represented than female represented, some others as well. So for the validation, we use the partial least squares structure equation modeling, PLSM. We used measurement model validation. So we examined the convergent validity, discriminant validity. We also used 4 tasks to determine the convergent validity, which are reliability of items, composite reliability, constructs, and average variance extracted and Cronbach alpha. We also assessed discriminant validity through 2 tasks, item loading of constructs and cross correlation of the constructs. And later on, we'll also check for the structural model validation by 2 different methods to present it here. So what we have found, the cross-loading and loading of measurement items, they have shown pretty high loadings that show that our model holds. We also check the cross correlation and composite reliability Cronbach alpha and average variance extracted. And we also find that there are very good loadings and correlations. So the model is holding. We looked at the results for the structuration model at 8 hypotheses that we have suggested. And we found 2 of them not supported in our sample, but the model itself holds. So we found that perceived privacy risk affect privacy concern is supported, perceived privacy risk affect non-self-closure is supported, perceived privacy risk affects student trusting beliefs, but we didn't find the link between perceived privacy control and privacy concerns and non-disclosure behavior, which is a bit surprising because we expected this result as compared to previous research. But as we know, it's a contextual nature, so it may be validated in other contexts if we try to replicate this study in other contexts, see if the model actually holds in some other countries. So in general, we found that students' perceptions of privacy risk in LA practices are a determinant factor on their privacy concerns. We also found that students' trusting belief and non-disclosure behavior can be shaped by their privacy concerns, privacy risk, and control perceptions. So as a result, we'd like to suggest some research applications, which include that the student need to consent to use their data. So this is what we often do, not necessarily every time. We also need to talk about the transparency about data protection and related decision and strategy. We need to make all the decisions more transparent and more available. We also need to raise the students' worth in determining data collection processes and also let students to review their data for decisions and strategies. We need to involve students in design process from the very start, I would say, not wait until we have an instrument ready. So how privacy protection should be designed, it should be decided by the stakeholders in the first hand. We also know that privacy research stresses their privacy notice, which is a significant factor for reducing the individual risk perception by providing them with information about institutional information practices. Privacy notice clarifies for the data subject how the organization protects individual privacy and how it implements privacy practices. That is how their data are being collected for the purposes of this data collection and also the different uses of the data collection. This practically in practice implies that higher education institutions need to ensure that students are aware of and understand institutional data strategies and policies. What are the implications from this study? So students' perceptions of privacy risk and privacy control are antecedents of privacy concerns, trust in the higher education institution, and also their willingness to share personal information. Enhancing student perceptions of privacy control and reducing perceptions of privacy risk are essential for late adoption success. So how do the institution will do it? I think it's up to the institution, the discussion, and I guess some of the solutions can be transferable across institutions and settings, but some of them will be pretty much context specific, but this is something that the scholars and practitioners should work with. We also need to consider contextual factors that may influence students' privacy concerns, and this is something that have to be thoroughly considered and studied in the future. So what this study contributes with? The study contributed with their enhanced theoretical understanding of the relationship between privacy concern, trust, and self-disclosure behavior in the lay setting of higher education. It also complements previous studies on privacy that preliminarily have focused on social media and health and the commercial sector. We also provide the insights about students' privacy concerns, and in particular, the relationship between these concerns and the other antecedents and behavioral outcomes. And finally, we offer a set of relevant implications for lay research and practice. We don't provide a solution, but we provide a hopefully practicable way to go forward. So in the future, we would recommend the researchers to complement and to carry qualitative research to provide a deep understanding of the nature of various hypotheses. So we have only these numbers in the students' answers, but exactly understand, explain why we need to talk to the students or use another methods. We also need to collect data from other countries, regular systems, and cultural context to understand the contextual nature of privacy in LA. And this is something that we haven't done so much yet, and this is something that the community can do. We can also consider other antecedents and outcomes of privacy that we have not included in the SPICE model, but they still can be valid or relevant for unpacking further the privacy in LA settings. So take a look at the APACO framework that I have presented earlier and see whether there is something else that we should and need to test and see whether it plays a role for understanding what can be done to enhance and protect student privacy. So this was it from me. So thank you very much. And I hope it was not too heavy with all the text. And very welcome with the questions.
Thank you, Olga, for this great presentation. We can do virtual clapping. I see some people already reacting there. And the idea now is to open the floor for discussion. If you have any questions and you want me to ask your question on behalf of you, you can write the question in the chat. And also what you could do is that you can raise your hand virtually in Zoom, and we will allow you to unmute yourself and you can ask your question yourself. So I see already a hand up, or not, Rob? Oh, that was like a clap. So any questions? I say Pablo. I think, yeah, you can mute yourself. Okay.
Hello, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been dense, but very rich, very interesting. A lot of to digest. I was wanted to accompany you with the feeling, a bit of frustration that you experimented when you expected one hypothesis to happen and finally didn't. You expected the privacy control to be correlated to privacy concerns, isn't it? It was that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in, yeah, that begs the question. Why? I mean, what I'm like to know is what questions or what did you study to be encapsulated in privacy control? What were the questions, or what were the features that you studied in order to put it in the box of privacy control?
Okay.
To go more in details about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will go back to the questionnaire that I have here, I think. Wait. Here. So we have the privacy control. We looked at whether students believe, so it's to the left here, down to the left. So whether students believe to have control over who can access their personal information, whether they think they have control over what personal information is shared with others, and whether they have control over how their personal information is used by the university, as well as they believe or not if they can control personal information. Yes. Pablo, have a hand up, or?
Oh, sorry.
So this was 4 items that were included in the construct that we have looked at. So we expected based on the previous research, but as I said, it doesn't mean that we will not find this link maybe in another contract. It may happen that there are certain values how students in Sweden look at privacy. We have a pretty, let's say, open society with the high values of privacy, of trust and openness and transparency. So it can be cultural specific. So it may be, you may find some different results in other contexts. I don't know, but I will figure out maybe so.
Well, let me just follow up. The privacy control may be just a question out loud. Maybe related to the fact that usually, above all, new generations, the young generation have some sense of control, in the sense that every application or websites or all the channels, there are some ways to that give the sense of empowerment to the people, to the users. Like yes, I can go to configuration and click here, click there, and I'm in control. Or I can say no, I don't want these cookies. I'm being asked. So maybe that. I mean, what do you think about this? This feeling that maybe puts us all in some sense of
Yeah, I think
control, whereas it's not the case, maybe.
We put as one of the implications that, or recommendation, that the practitioners can work on increasing their perceptions of privacy control. They can do measurement, they can do something in the institution with the information, with the transparency and other things to increase their perception of privacy control, as you suggested. So I think it's possible. How to do it, I don't have an answer now. It depends on the context and the stakeholders we have.
In the lines of like, yeah, these questions about, or these concerns about context, there is a good question in the chat from Roberta Sharp about how well, if like it is premature to worry about privacy at this point before institutions have embraced LA. Like in a way, there might be institutions who well, that already have not necessarily implemented LA, learning analytics, I mean by LA, and maybe they're using data for their own decision making. So in those type of contexts, like it would be good or not from your perspective to start discussing about student privacy or privacy in a broad way. What is your take on that, Olga?
I think it's thank you very much for the question. It's a big question. There are several questions in this question, but what I think we still need policies. We still need some decision, even though they're ongoing practices. Of course, they are. They may be not very transparent, and they may be still using already student data. So when we collected these data for this question, we had some open-ended question as well, where some of the students said that they don't have a choice today. They're pretty much open, but they don't have a choice to decide what data is collected currently, how it's used, for what purposes. So they're not giving any kind of information from the institutions, I mean, with maybe some exceptions at some universities or some institutions, but I would say in the prevailing context, they are not aware of such practices. So I think it's still, of course, important. Even let's say, I would say in the Scandinavia, pretty transparent and open to privacy and blah, blah, but we still need to protect. It doesn't still mean that we should violate the rights of the students or their privacy. It's still very important to do so. And I also see in the chat, there is a question, how important is LA in learning? This is a big question. This is, I guess, should be the core. So we do LA for improved learning and improved teaching. So whatever measurements we do, they should lead to the improved learning outcomes in different forms, as a grades, as a skills, whatever. So this is the core. So LA is about learning. It should not be about the numbers only.
No, for sure. And in that case, for example, what happens in my institutions is that we have like a growing maturity, still developing maturity of adoption of our learning analytics tools, so people can see the benefit of relying on learning analytics in order to drive support or interventions to improve learning. But at the same time, there is this fear of not understanding what to do about student privacy. So there is a tension about how to much go forward through the use of learning analytics, but also like this feeling of like, maybe we should do nothing because we're concerned about like maybe surpassing something that we have not detected in a way.
I think one of the major stops in many institutions now, they don't often know exactly. So there are legislation, there are some maybe policies, that maybe not. There are some committees, but very often there is a lot of uncertainty how to go around to implementing the practice for many reasons. So we need some practicable solutions for doing so.
Yeah, so in a way, for example, I have a question. In the meantime, if you have any from the audience and you want to post another question in the chat, please do, or raise your hand. So in that case, how you perceive like the work or the frameworks that you refer to could help institutions in this type of like debates, or how you picture like how, because in a way you did a whole section about how the implications for policy in a way, but maybe just like doing this direct transfer to an institution, what would be your recommendations?
I think it depends a little bit on what the institution is and what context, but when we know the students' perceptions of privacy risk and privacy control are antecedents to their privacy concerns, so I would say institutions should work on kind of reducing their perception of privacy risk, and also that enable their privacy control. So they are in charge of how data is used. So how the institutions will do it, in particular, there is a question for each institution and committee that is doing so. But this is a good way to start to look what are existing practices, let's say, and what are the potential opportunities that they can further develop and build upon. Also, I think what's important here is to put different types of stakeholders together, not only, work separately with the students or separately with the lawyers or separately with the teachers, because all of them are somehow involved, but to put them in the joint conversations to see, what are the challenges lawyers experience, what are the challenge practitioner experiences, and see how they can meet. And I'm not sure whether it happens very often today, but I think some practicable workshops will be really good at the institution to force a bit to facilitate such process, such development. And it's not an easy process, but we have to start somewhere. And also we can ask them, to define how do they understand privacy in a Scandinavian country, how did they understand privacy in Latin America, for example, or Germany, and see whether the definition is same or whether some specificities around them, and how they align with the laws and legislation that we have.
Thank you for the recommendations. Definitely, I think it's really important to start conversations among different type of stakeholders, and there is an interesting piece about one thing it's how people feel about it, and then also regulations.
Yeah. It's one about how they feel and what they're concerned and what they expect, and also what other laws. So, for example, I know in the Swedish settings, with the COVID situation, we have these proctoring tools coming out. Some universities allow, some didn't. And my question, why, we have the same legislation. So how these interpretations go on in different institutions, and why we have different decisions when we have the same law, basically. But this is another question.
Yeah, it's true. Rogers.
Yeah, thanks so much, Olga. This is a very interesting topic, and I think we are all struggling with it in different ways, at least as researchers. And I don't know whether this is not like a question, but it's also more of a reflection. But I would also like to hear your thoughts about it. Like recently, we wrote a paper where we are mapping about ethical and privacy issues on the African continent, and we're trying to look at what's happening between institutions and regulations and the different frameworks. And one of the things we realized was the fact that different countries, for example, have different kind of policies about privacy, and they have different regulations. So there are issues with about the transfers of data. So some accept, others are not accepting that. So there's lack of a clear understanding and regulations, and this actually impacts when it comes to learning analytics at scale. For example, we may think about how do we develop tools. For example, if we are developing dashboards, whose vendors are possibly more from the West, it could also be like here, if you are developing a dashboard or a learning analytics tool that has to consider privacy within the design, it becomes challenging. Like, are we going to develop tools for each and every region that aligns with the privacy regulations for that area? Are we going to have a Scandinavian closed kind of system or tool that is going to be working used in this kind of a context? So the thing is about this kind of tension between the different regulations for different environments and contexts. In Europe, we have GDPR, and then when you go to African countries, they have specific individual regional policies about data. So the process of it may not be the learning analyst community to do this, but I don't know what your reflection about all these different kind of policies and regulations, and how do we then develop tools and approaches that are going to be applicable to different contexts while recognizing the issue of privacy? And does this go back to people who are developing the tools, both the technology people, but also researchers? how do we make sure that we actually think about these aspects while doing learning analytics design and implementation?
I think there were, thank you, Rogers, many things there again. but what I think is important is that whatever privacy design we do, we need to think about the law we have, so we really don't break the law. We also need to think about the stakeholders. So I would recommend, from the very beginning, involve the stakeholder in such a design process, and parallel following the institutional policies that you have for data collection that should compile with the legislation we have on a national or European level. So it's not a one solution to everything, but there are many different aspects to consider. And as you say, there are like policies differ at some institutions, they exist and some not. In some places, data stored in one place, in some other in 10 places. We don't know. It's very different across different context, I would say.
It seems that there is another questions as well. So Pablo. But before I'm gonna post something here in the chat. It's for the rest of the audience. Okay, Pablo.
Is one thing that I like to bring up is the controversy that we have when we do research, when we ask a question, and then the subjects answer. This cliff that we need to think about the difference between what we ask and what they answer. I mean, what they understand of our question, right? So there's a distance always between what we try to ask and what they understand. So I was thinking, if we ask about privacy, I thought about that when we think about privacy is there is one side of the spectrum you can find the fear or be afraid of disclosure our details, upfront, all our most private things. That would be one spectrum, and then and the other side of the spectrum is so I had to say we have the right, or we feel the right of not disclosure, of not being used of those data. That's what we all feel. But then if we carry on in the spectrum to the other side, you start to think my details anonymously used for other purposes, like you start losing identity of that data, but still my data, right? So I am being used, my data is being used for something. At the end of the spectrum, you may find people that feel the right of not disclosing that. And you may find people that don't feel that is a problem with privacy. So there will be two sides, there are people that wouldn't want that, and there are people that don't care, right? So it's a spectrum, right? So my point is, if before we ask the question about privacy issues, we could find where the person, the subject is in that spectrum, maybe we can get some data out of it. I mean, with the answers, and then correlate what is this people thinking about privacy exactly. What is it privacy for this guy, and for this guy, and for this guy? And that is something I was wanted to know your opinion about.
I do agree what privacy mean. It also evolves, it depends on the one context to another. When you think about your privacy in higher education, you may think differently when you use in social media. It can vary depending on the purposes of what you are doing, basically. But yes, I do agree. We need to involve them. We need to involve them very, very early in the definitions and design and evaluation, what's going, and also maybe think about customized solutions for if you would like, to have some transferable solution if there exists, then we may think about customized option for doing so. So where they can choose their privacy settings and, make a decision where to use the data or not, and what data to use and what not to use.
Thank you, Olga. We just have like 4 minutes left. Any other question you may have, comment here or through the chat? Yes, Pablo?
I was it's very short. When you said that there was a 75% of the papers didn't give any definition at all of privacy. So I was wondering if that means not even indirectly, like putting a citation to some definition or something like that.
Yeah, they do define, not define, they're related to some way or another, and I can share with you some results. We have some results for those that are not defined. We didn't have in our research question, but I would recommend also to go in depth, for looking for this relationship and not define definitions. It may be not done on purpose, maybe on purpose, we don't know, but we need to clarify, and all this concept of that I have mentioned, not privacy. Sometimes they are mentioned in very interwoven ways, and we need to understand, a bit how they relate to each other, because this is not very easy relationship we are talking about. They all have influence on each other in some way or another. Yeah, I do agree with Ture. Build on this and bounds is my advice. We are currently starting doing that as well, Ture, so thank you. I think we're conducting some studies looking from the lens of this framework, and also these, that I mentioned, transmission principle, actors, these norms and attributes that I mentioned in the presentation. We need to carefully examine all of them to be able to do something about it.
Thank you, Olga. Since we are about to run out of time, I would like to give you a very big thank you on behalf of Solar. And also thank you to everyone joining today. I hope it was a fruitful reflection to see Olga's presentation for your work, or to inspire other people to adopt learning analytics, but taking into consideration privacy concerns. And we have shared a couple of links in the chat. So we will be posting the recording and the materials in our website. And also there is a mailing list if you want to be part and keep up with Solar activities. And we also have a webinar every 2 months. So the next webinar should be in August. We're still we will announce details soon in order to keep you posted. So I will suggest if you're interested to subscribe to the Solar newsletter in the links that we have shared. So I also would like to thank from the Solar committee who are joining today, help us organize this, from Rogers and Joanna, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day, regardless of the time zone where you are joining us. So thank you, and thank you, Olga.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Thanks.
Salud.
Salud. Bye-bye.